Welcome everyone to Play to Your Best, a summit, a masterclass series with incredible experts in mindset, nutrition, training, recovery. And we have the incredible Bonnie, and I'm Wisener. Yeah, I said it right. With us, who is a specialist in looking at digestive health and so much more. I think that, in my discussions with her, she's a registered holistic nutritionist. And I first should say, welcome, Bonnie. Thank you for coming.
And thank you for having me, Tennille. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
I just want to launch in about we have had such incredibly rich discussions in preparation for this interview. And I think what's so powerful about what it is that you're doing is you bring in, you have this holistic nutrition, power of foods, this really service-minded, supportive way of being. It's so clear to me. You are really sensitive to, in your work with your clients, that it's hard to actually sometimes talk about and even know, is it discomfort or it can be embarrassing, it's not fun. And we come up sometimes what am I doing wrong? This kind of feeling of, if I just did this, if I just did that. And I just feel that this conversation that we're going to have on, goodness me, stress, the digestive system, but so much more is so pertinent. And I guess that's where I want to start, is just that feeling of how normal this is. And this, here we are, and we're in a phase of perimenopause and in the beyond. And when our world starts shifting so much and we just don't even look at our bodies and we don't know where, there's something different here. And then just maybe start with, there's no fault here.
Absolutely. That's an amazing place to start. And actually, Tennille, as we were talking before you pressed record, what I was thinking also is we really have had some amazing discussions previously. And we were just before hitting record, for everyone listening, we sort of launched into this chat that I think is relevant to what Tennille's bringing up here. And that was our belief systems and the way we look at things, our paradigm, right? And first of all, one thing that struck me, or has struck me today talking to you, which I also think is relevant to this discussion, is I see you, and I know of myself, I consider myself a lifelong learner. So as a lifelong learner, you have to challenge things that you think you already know, right? And I see that in you so much in the little bit we've been talking, and the bits of insight I've gotten into how you operate in your business. And why that's relevant here is because you're right. When it comes to things that don't go well, especially as we enter this phase of life, I don't profess to be an expert. I'm in it with all of you, right? And it can be so challenging. And, I try and do the same thing I do with everything else. I read and I try and learn. And one thing that I have learned for myself that I think might resonate is that it's not just the physical changes that we're dealing with, right? There's so much about this life stage that is presenting us with different stressors. So heading into the stress discussion, right? Whether you are my age, so I'm 58, and I have 3 young adult children who are no longer full-time living in my house, right? They're away. Everything about the way that you've sort of operated or the lifestyle you've created is challenged. It doesn't mean it's bad things at all. It's just challenged. And I think inherent to that challenge or those changes comes stress, right? Stress can be good or bad. You know that from the movement world for sure, in terms of our body's reception of these things. So I think that this explains why, to your point, you had also just commented about how common this is. So we're talking now about digestive impairment, right, for a minute. So 10 to 13% of the population, I believe in Canada, actually complains, has IBS or digestive impairment. So that's just a dysfunction of how your digestive system is meant to work. Okay, so something like IBS, for example, is a functional condition. It's not organic. There's no disease involved that we know of yet. It's sort of very airy-fairy. One thing we do know is that for women in this age bracket, so sort of from peri to menopause, right, with that fluctuation of hormones and different things happening in our body, that 10 to 13% number, I've read estimates as high as it jumping to nearly 40% at 38%. That's huge. And one reason for that, it can be very complex because obviously that's the other thing. We're always looking for simple answers, and most of the time it's not that straightforward. But as far as gut health and function goes, that can easily be partially addressed due to the stressors that we all can relate to at this stage of our life.
Mm-hmm.
And the stress also comes from just physiological stress, the fact that these hormones are fluctuating, that estrogen levels are dropping. Your body perceives change like that as a stressor, right? And on top of that, you take not just our perceived stress, because that's something that's very almost intangible, right? It depends on how you see things, but good and bad stressors. Like I said, at this stage of life, change can be stressful. Diet can create stress, like your actual nutritional choices could create stress. An example of that, and I'll take a breath so that you can.
Yeah.
But an example of that is, for example, people don't like to talk about this one, and I'm not wearing my armor today, but caffeine consumption, for example. So let me just walk.
Oh no!
No, it's fine, all in balance, right, ladies? Let me just take a step back on that one, just to demonstrate a point. So obviously, caffeine is a stimulant, right? Coffee is delicious. Caffeine is a stimulant. And decaf, just for the record, because I always get asked, but I drink decaf. Well, decaf still has quite a bit of caffeine, about half the amount of regular, in case anyone's interested. But just to demonstrate an example of how our dietary choices, our choices of what we consume, can actually instigate that stress, physical stress. So caffeine, for example, you could have been a person who had 1 or 2 cups of coffee your entire life cycle or lifetime, no problem, right? No heightened anxiety, no weight gain, no nothing. And suddenly this, although most people wouldn't trace it to this, could be a problem. And the reason for that is, as estrogen drops, cortisol increases. Our stress hormones actually increase in relation to estrogen dropping. Estrogen dropping during this life is very common, as you know. So adding anything, sugar, simple carbs, just on the nutrition front, caffeine is a big one. That could actually be something you've done your whole life without any issue. Like, big deal, 1 or 2 cups of coffee a day. Typically not a big deal. We actually now know that that's actually a genetic predisposition if it is a big deal. We have slow and fast metabolizers of caffeine. But setting that aside for a second, just focusing on this, if you are someone who is experiencing a sudden disruption in how your digestive system works, so maybe you're noticing that you're blocked up more than you used to. You used to have a bowel movement every morning, and suddenly that's not as dependable anymore. If you're someone who notices that suddenly, or in the last year, or whatever the case may be, but chronically, not once in a while, you are waking up, your stomach is sort of a certain way, and by the end of the day, you're not necessarily feeling a little sluggish, you're constantly bloated. Some people report feeling and looking pregnant by the end of the day. These are real things. I would just ask someone to examine, some of the choices they're making. I mean, there are many factors to this, obviously, particularly the bloating piece, but just like as an example, in terms of the impact that our nutrition selections have on the stress in our body. Stress, the place in our nervous system where stress conducts itself, so our sympathetic nervous system, we're designed to deal with stressors like, that famous being chased by a lion kind of stress. We reserve energy, we conserve energy, we acquire more energy, it sort of all compiles. Blood flow goes a certain way. When we're in that mode, for whatever reason, whether it's nutritional inputs, actual, you had a fight with your husband, work's not going well, whatever the case may be, when we're in that mode, digestion gets downregulated automatically because that takes place in the parasympathetic nervous system. Blood flow draws away from our digestive organs in order to deal with stress. So it's not your imagination, and it's not the old-fashioned, you used to go to your doctor, complain of a stomach ache, and they'd be like, "Oh, it's all in your head," or stress, or can you try and reduce your stress? It's like at this stage of life, we actually have to, unfortunately, create a new paradigm, be curious about it, and sort of observe which of these things might actually be impacting that. If it's something new at this stage of life, for people who have maybe dealt with this throughout their entire life, to one degree or another, constipation is usually a very good example. It could worsen at this age, right? So these are just things to keep in mind in terms of stress. Obviously, not just with respect to digestion, with respect to just managing this life cycle in this stage, managing stress is I feel like it's a bit of a hot button these days, right? Particularly because of what the world just went through. But I don't think there's any mystery left to the idea that stress has an impact on our physical function in a variety of different ways.
Yeah. There is a lot to unpack there. And I love it how one of the, just to point out something really tangible that people can look to is like that idea of regularity and bowel movements, is really important to say, all right, I'm not regular right now. Where am I on my stress scale? Like something so tangible, and being like, do I need to check in with myself? And is it my stress level, like in the extended ways of living? It could be stress of training. Because again, talking about blood going to the gut, blood going away from the gut, like where's the blood, when you're working really, really hard and you're needing to heal, it's not going in the gut, it's going in those muscles. So is it stress in your relationships, or is it stress at work, or is it stress in, whatever? It's your signal. It's like the canary, it's going, something's wrong here. I think that's really something tangible we can all take. The thing I want to just like pull back on and just like maybe uncover a little bit more is we talk so much always about estrogen. And I think that's obviously, it's a big one, but there's this thing called progesterone. Super important. And we know like how, after when you are menstruating regularly, after we have our period and we can have loose bowels, and after pregnancy, things get, really shifted, etc. And I think that it's important, and maybe if you're able to speak to it all, and this idea of this progesterone being such an incredible component of regularity and the flow of things. And when we have such irregular periods, then how this may also be an impact, and what other things that we need to think about there.
Wow. So my understanding is that with respect to progesterone and estrogen, there isn't really in either case, an ideal level or amount, but the balance is really important, right? So again, a couple of things, I guess, a couple of ways of answering the question. The first is that making sure to nourish yourself appropriately for you at this stage is really important. There aren't specific foods. Well, there are in a way. Okay, let's talk about a tangible strategy, because there aren't, you can read a little bit about specific foods that should encourage production of this or production of that. I don't know how much I buy into that. I think our body has a way of naturally balancing itself. And one of the ways that we do it from a dietary perspective is to ensure that we have enough fiber, right? Because fiber is a non-digestible carbohydrate that we know most North Americans don't get enough of. And fiber has a way of naturally helping your body eliminate or get rid of, right, through regularity, going back to that again, and help balance the whole estrogen progesterone situation, whether you're, someone who's regularly having a menstrual cycle or not, right? To the best of our current ability, of whatever the ability is at the time. But in terms of elimination, that is a reason why, if you notice that you're like, people don't value, this is like, I think we can all relate to this. Most of us don't value a good, solid bowel movement until we don't have one regularly, right? And people who I work with who have literally almost their entire life, let's say they started withholding their bowel movements in elementary school. They didn't want to go poop in a public bathroom in elementary school, change their motility pattern through to adulthood, et cetera, et cetera. Believe it or not, it's sometimes difficult to get people like that to change their paradigm, to realize this isn't actually necessarily the norm. It's been their norm, but why from a health perspective and why from a balancing perspective or homeostatic perspective, it would be important to help even at this stage encourage a more regular bowel movement schedule. So we work on things like that. So if you're listening to this and you've either noticed that at this stage of life, that's changed for you, it's something to pay attention to. It really is, because of the reason I just discussed. Or even if you're someone who has dealt with this your whole entire life, and you and I, Neil, talked about this in our original conversation, we need to recognize that our body requires different things at different stages of life.
Yeah.
And with respect to nutrition, it's fascinating because we sort of do know that for infants, right? We know that infants, newborns and infants, have certain dietary requirements that are different than, people who chew their food and have full diets. And I would say the next most common place that people sort of understand that is when we're pregnant as women, right? We kind of know that we need at least more calories, right? More resources, more vitamins and minerals. But outside of those two examples, we basically eat the same way as when we were a teenager till now, right? It changes again for elderly people because really just almost by accident, you'll often find that people who are older, much older, tend to eat a lot less. And the reason for that is it's probably uncomfortable to eat the way they used to because they actually truly physically have different access to resources like hydrochloric acid, stomach acid, or even enzyme support that does diminish as we age. So the reason I mention that is if you're someone at this stage, our stage of life, who's kind of noticing that things are shifting from a digestive perspective, the best advice is if this is new for you, pay attention to it now. Like really try and just be observant around it and just keep an open mind to doing things a little differently to help support that now.
I think that's so brilliant. Let's stay on that thinking a little bit longer. I have an athlete who absolutely went into the postmenopause space and again needed to shift. And actually ended up having a paleo diet, which actually cleared up a lot of the challenges that she was having. And it wasn't because it was paleo. It wasn't like an ethical, or it wasn't like on that kind of stream. It was just like, this is the nutritional strategy that I need right now. Can you talk a little bit, like, I love it that you brought up, okay, fiber is, I mean, it's generally always important at every life stage, let's be honest, but particularly important when we're trying to balance, as you say, or have our hormones like start to, get rid of excess, or however that, the terminology is that works for you. Now, post-menopause, we don't have these, estradiol and progesterone. So what sort of things in that post-menopause phase do we need to start to think about differently as well?
Okay, so first of all, just using that client you just mentioned as an example, I don't know their whole picture, but it's interesting to me because obviously I think, in case you're not aware, paleocentric diet reduces carbs significantly, right? In favor of things like protein. So because we're talking about an athlete, people might automatically think, oh, protein for muscle density and building as an anabolic nutrient, et cetera, et cetera. But in reality, the reason I think that could be relevant for someone who is very athletic at the level that you coach, right? So not just to be clear, I'm not really talking about someone, although this could be relevant for someone who goes to the gym twice a week also, but especially at the level that you coach, I think. Again, exercise, you can probably talk to this better than I, certainly creates a certain level of body stress. It's intended to, right? Like that's the benefit of exercise. You challenge and then you challenge and you improve and you adapt and that whole thing, right? For competitive type of exercise. But if you also, in combination with that lifestyle at this stage, include foods that, or too many foods that, and it's interesting because like runners, for example, I don't know if this falls into that category, but like a marathon runner, we all hear about carb loading, right? For marathon runners, because they're using the energy like throughout their marathon run. But for people who aren't doing that, watching your carb intake, and I'm not advocating for a low carb diet, but the type of carbohydrates that you choose should be low glycemic carbs, or looking at it a more positive way, higher fiber carbohydrates. So less processed carbs. So the grain, why again? I mean, just to be clear, when we're talking about higher fiber carbs, that means they don't break down to glucose. They don't give us the energy or the excess glucose as quickly. Why is that good? Because when our body has that, that's like another signal for stress, right? Our blood sugar needs to be in balance in order to be in a homeostatic or more balanced state. So I think there's some relationship there to even the example that you gave with that client, but I think that could be relevant for anybody who's training at that level if you start to see a shift. This happened to me. I mean, my classic symptom, just really briefly, when I was 52, I stopped getting a period regularly 6 years ago. Just so happens that at that time, my midlife crisis was, God knows why, I decided to become a spin instructor at 48, right? So I was like doing very intense, it's crazy, very intense exercise, and it was wonderful at that stage of my life. And unfortunately, because it was something I really did love, it took me a little while from about 52 to 54-ish to realize that type of exercise, to the extreme that I was doing it, was not servicing me well. I was highly anxious, right? So the stress reaction was a little too much for me in that scenario. So then I had a choice. I can either stop doing something I loved entirely, which I didn't do, or I could start incorporating more somatic exercise, like more stretching, more yoga type exercise. I mean, I wish I could tell you that I did that reliably well, because by nature, I am a person who prefers the other type of movement. That's the truth. I'm sure a lot of people can relate, but I knew that I needed to reduce it. And unfortunately, that's what I had to do. But that's, again, an example of what we started talking about, which was just slightly opening our minds and shifting our paradigm, something that in this case I adored. Obviously, I loved it, but I couldn't do it as much as I wanted to, right? I couldn't do it as much as I wanted to. And obviously that came in conjunction with, trying to figure out some sleep pattern issues, trying to adapt, play with. I wasn't ever like you could talk to me in the morning before I had coffee. I was never like reliant on coffee, but I still did try and look at any areas of like my diet that might have also been facilitating this sort of anxiety reaction that I was having, and an interruption in sleep that I was having, and eventually sluggishness around digestion that I was having, right? So, yeah.
So I think, okay, so one of the questions I have then that stem out of that is, okay, so understandably, 2 points that I want to make. Yes, as we know, athletes, females need to have more protein as we age for maintaining and building, if that's your goal, muscle health, period. That, and then in relation to that, bringing in more of the fiber to also balance out, or if you're post-menopause and not trying to balance because they're gone, then understanding how that will help your management of the stressors of insulin increasing and managing that. Get it. Now, when we go, one thing that I guess I want to just kind of bring into is this idea of nutrient absorption. And how do we, so say we have an awareness, okay, yeah, I get it. I do want to increase my fiber. I want to make some changes. What is a healthy process for our digestive system to be able to actually do this? Because I think of it like the way that I coach and I educate is like, okay, so just imagine you've just all of a sudden like you hit the weight room, is the first thing that you do is just like lift a huge heavy amount of weight. Well, no, because your body's not ready for it. So it's like, do you just go like straight into that? No. I am going to eat clean and I am on it because your digestion is amazing. Can you speak to that for our listeners to this?
Definitely. So that is a brilliant question. And it's interesting because I do see people go from, it really does depend where you're starting, right? Mm-hmm. So you can see significant physical improvements in terms of how you feel just by, as you say, cleaning up your diet. What does that even mean, right? It means, obviously, for the regular person, consuming less sugar, maybe modifying your macros a little bit, because we tend in North America to have a really heavy carb intake and maybe not as much protein as we should. You mentioned for athletes, you need to have more protein. Well, for women at this age, you also need to have more protein to account for the fact that your muscle density is going to, reduce slightly because of the estrogen fluctuations. But something that you, to your point, if you are suddenly looking for more fiber, you know what? I've known my whole life that I need to eat more fruits and vegetables, for example. I know I need to have more multi-rich grains, less processed grains in my diet, etc. Don't go from A to Z, because you will end up possibly creating a problem. A lot of people end up with sluggishness or slow bowel because of an increase in fiber that's too rapid. So definitely go slowly based on where you're starting now. So don't follow, the guidelines are 25 to 35 grams of fiber a day. When I do an intake, on average, somebody is, very often people are like between 15 and 20 grams of fiber a day. What's interesting is, I think I mentioned this to you, because of the pandemic and working virtually, I actually had an opportunity to work with some European clients, and they do not start there. They actually start at a more, So in North America, we are really depleted in terms of the amount of fiber. But as you inch up in, let's say, added fiber, for example, you always want to make sure that you are hydrating appropriately, because that's one way to mitigate the slowdown, right?
Yeah.
Because as I said, fiber is an undigestible carb that actually slows down the rate that our food turns to glucose, right? So you want to ensure that you are hydrated so that you can keep things moving.
Yeah, it's super interesting because, again, like just tying in age and tying in athleticism and being active, and in many parts of the United States in particular, and even here in the Western Canada, it's a lot warmer than normal. And this idea of hydration and aging, our thirst receptors started becoming more mute. So really having a consciousness and awareness of what we are actually doing. And I think, would you just speak briefly to, like, hydration is a funny one, because we think, okay, yeah, we need to have our big, jugs of water, where's your jug of water? Hydration is so much more than that. It's in our foods, it's in our, so many things. And can you help us understand a little bit more about that piece of it as well? Because that's, again, such an incredibly important part of digestive health.
Yeah, it is really important to eat hydrating foods as well. But true hydration, I think, takes place without having to digest. So as your body's not working. So the standard, it'll be different for, again, people who are more athletic and more physical potentially. But the standard average adult, let's say 6 to 8 glasses of water a day as a guideline. is still relevant. But I've worked with people who come to me with these issues and they're already at that place, right? So it really is for you. You sometimes have to increase. I just had an example of a client I'm working with who thought she was drinking well because she always had her, glass of water on her desk with her. And she estimated that she was drinking between 6 and 8 glasses of water a day. And then she got one of these glasses that measure, like I have here, and she actually started even pouring that into her kettle, when she was making herbal teas or whatever. And she realized she wasn't at all. She was having closer to 4 8-ounce glasses of water a day. And so why is that important? Because she was someone who was varying between constipation and diarrhea. She was getting terrible headaches. She suffers from migraines. And again, just checking in to make sure that you're actually hydrated. It's such a fundamental piece. It and the fiber piece tend to be the 2 places where I actually do see people at the lowest end, right? So they think they're at the higher end. Some people include things like caffeine or whatever into their glasses of water or whatever drinking things consumed. Sorry.
Yeah.
But it really is best if you're looking at things that, or just drinking water or herbal tea, because it doesn't have to go through any sort of special metabolic process to be used by our body.
Right.
And in terms of something you mentioned earlier, we aren't what we eat. We are actually what we absorb, which is really important for everybody, but for athletes in particular, right? Because you're trying to do all this amazing stuff, hopefully nutritionally for your body for performance purposes. But if you have some sort of digestive impairment, or you are underhydrated because of the excess, the amount of output that you have, then that could actually be impacting absorption. So you're not even accessing the nutrients as optimally as you could under that circumstance.
Yeah. I think, thank you for that. I think it's so incredible to think of, like, why in the world, I just want to kind of like put this in perspective and why this is so important and why I asked you to come on. And it's this foundation of health so that we can perform and keep going and find consistency. And, for those that are performance minded, in other words, and that's, we have a real range of people that do want to absolutely eke out. Like, I want to be going to Kona. I want to go and be my best. I want a faster time. We have absolutely those, females. And we also have like, I just want to keep going and I don't really care about the time, Tennille. Like, I just want to stay strong and like keep having fun with my family and my friends. And no matter where you are on that spectrum, that, how we get to be out there in the world in our sports and how we are in our movement is entirely dependent on this foundation.
Yeah. Well,
and,
I mean, and in recent years, like going a little deeper into the gut health picture, gut health by definition is like there's certain tangible things that have to happen that are sort of symbols of a good or well operating digestive system. But gut health fundamentally is actually based on a balanced composition of gut bacteria. That's what we've been learning over the last, let's say, 2 decades, right? So it's still baby science. We still have a lot to learn about it. But if your gut bacteria is out of balance, that could be causing some of these symptoms, first of all. But more importantly, that could be affecting your energy, your output potential, your metabolism, all of these things. We know that that's sort of like the cog. This, it's being more and more investigated or scientifically researched as sort of the core for our overall health, like all the tentacles that sort of lead from that. So that's an important thing to mention here as well in terms of why. Like, why is this even something I need to pay particular attention to? That would be part of the why.
Yeah, so important. All right, you've given us a ton of things to think about. So we come back, the caffeine, that it might not always be the same at every life stage. Okay. Yeah. Dang. Hey. Okay. I think it's an awareness thing. We've talked about hydration. We've talked about fiber. We've talked about protein. What other things did you want to share that are really key actions that we may not have covered here in understanding?
So I really like to share with people part of my message and like an important thing that I like to sort of impart with a category of people who do struggle in this area. People turn themselves inside out trying to figure out what foods might be causing their symptoms. This is a very common thing. And it makes sense, right? I mean, obviously, we don't feel well. I mean, as someone who has a history of Crohn's disease, I remember being in that mindset myself.
Right.
Anytime there would be a flare, I'd be like, what did I eat? You know, one day you could eat something, the next day you could eat it and have a totally different reaction.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting that there are better food choices for that person, and maybe some of the food choices aren't at all responsible.
Yeah.
However, what I am really wanting to get the message out about is that it's more likely that it is things like the stress, the impact of stress, how you're eating your food, which is something else I wanted to introduce here. So how you eat, so that being the circumstance that you eat under. Are you eating at your desk every single day, every meal? Are you sitting and having a pleasant meal with your family? Are you taking a few deep breaths coming out of a crazy meeting before you sit and grab a bite before your next crazy meeting? You don't want to eat, ideally, in a mode where your nervous system is engaged. You actually want to eat in a mode where your nervous system is calm. Because again, it'll be functioning more optimally in a calm state versus a not calm state. The other aspect to this, that again, in North America, we're just fast, 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 right? And maybe out west, I hope out west it's a slightly different pace. Here
Well,
in Toronto, it's mental. Like we're going from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. And
yeah.
we barely take time to eat the way we are intended to eat. So digestion is a cascade. And think of it as an assembly line. So if this step doesn't happen, that step's going to have a difficult time as well. So one of the first steps, and this is an easy thing to do in digestion, is mechanic. It's chew your food. Many of us hoover our food. We don't properly chew our food. And by doing that, I know it sounds so basic, right? But by doing that, you're literally creating messaging that creates the cascade for other things to happen, for enzymes to get secreted. Like this is a messaging. Plus, enzymes are in your saliva, so like it helps break down carbs first in your mouth, that kind of thing. So again, just very simply paying attention to how you eat. So eating under calm circumstances and actually physically looking after the process of chewing and actual first stage digestive process is important and could make a huge difference.
Yeah, what a grounding place is like, what is our, I mean, it's such a nuts, we could keep talking. I know we could, Bonnie. Like it's just on, our experiential, and how critical of a component that is. And how, I guess I'll just say this, because I know that you and I are so aligned in this, is like, it's also bringing us out of ourselves and into our connection. So when we're, think of the big meal, think of, our turkey dinners of, Thanksgiving, and when we experience food, but truly experience all of the aspects of coming in and togetherness of that. And it doesn't have to be saved for Thanksgiving dinners.
Yeah.
It is actually for every day. And it's what is my experience of this right now, and just pausing and allowing that cascade. I love that. I love that reminder there. Really perfect.
Yeah. You raise a really good point though, because again, certainly we all know the Thanksgiving or holiday dinner that's wrought with anxiety too, because of family dynamics or whatever. But outside of that, the connection piece that you just mentioned, I think all of us, we were talking about this before we hit record as well. It's really such a nourishing part for our nervous system. So that is important. And interestingly, when things changed in the world and people were spending more time at home and not at work yet and all of that, a lot of my clients who struggled with chronic digestive issues like IBS were thrilled, because suddenly they were at home. They were in complete control of, the food that they cooked. They made their own selections. They were near a bathroom. They had a private bathroom, like a lot of things, right? So taking little pieces of that and sort of incorporating it into our day-to-day life. You had asked another simple thing is we rely a little too heavily in North America on packaged foods. And I understand the need for convenience. I have that in my own home as well. But just, again, challenge yourselves to think about how often, you're picking up to dial in, or how often, you're not building a meal from scratch, because unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how much you like to be in the kitchen, of course, and things can be simple. It doesn't have to be gourmet, but for so many reasons, the more home cooked your meals are, the better. Even just from a blood sugar management perspective, we know that 2/3 of all packaged foods on Canadian grocery shelves have added sugar. We're not looking for that, right? So yeah, that's another big, big strategy.
It's a big one. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have given us so much. Before we get into our rapid fire questions, you have a free gift.
I do.
Of 5 tips to improve digestion. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So you know this, Tamila. For anyone listening, it's common in our industry, especially if you deliver information or services online as well as offline, to have, what we call something that's going to attract something that's going to be of service to someone, but that's going to attract attention. So oftentimes those take place in, a PDF, like something somebody could just sign up. I really wanted this to be, it's intimidating to hire a nutritionist sometimes. And I really wanted this to be something that somebody could really dig their teeth in and be a bit of a do-it-yourself. So it's almost like coming to see me, but it's like the entry stage. So it's literally 5 days of tips, things that some of them I've mentioned here today, but in a little more detail. So when someone signs up for this email series, it's a 5-day long series. And every day I focus on something else with a rationale, with some tips on how to get it done. The fiber piece is a perfect example. I forget what day it is now. It might be day 3 in this series, but it literally comes with a handout of like high fiber foods, that kind of thing. So the purpose and intent is, if you're struggling and you don't know where to start, right? And Google is taking you in 10 different directions. This is sort of a way to sort of start with some fundamental tips to start paying attention.
What a beautiful thing for people. Because I think that there's so much that, like, if you truly want to create some change, this is a good place. And if you need more accountability and you need the conversation, then you would be somebody that you could start that with. Because I think that there's this balance of like, I can do it, I'm going to go, and then it's like, sometimes it's actually you're paying for the accountability rather than the information.
100%. It's we all, I mean, I'm sure you can relate, I can relate, different challenges in our lives, things that come up you don't expect. We want to do well, our intentions are good. But anyway, hopefully this email series, I have to say, I've gotten good feedback on it. And once you're into it, it is free, by the way. And once you're into it, it'll direct you to other resources I have that are also complimentary.
Oh, that's brilliant. Well, thank you so much. All right. I have some rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. What in your work or learning are you really excited about at this time?
That's easy. Okay. So I mentioned that I am a lifelong learner. I love learning. And I just got myself involved in collaborative, like a business collaborative, with somebody who I consider to be a mentor, who's going to help me bring this digestive health group that I've created over the last 1.5 years to more people, I hope.
Oh, brilliant.
Teach me how to basically share with more people. And I am excited. It's a big step for, it's a big investment of my time and that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. It is. It's huge. And it stems from a passion of, and again, like what I said at the very beginning, of to being service, and it's the fundamental part of happiness. So what's one thing that you're grateful for?
Easy, hands down, my husband and my children and the health of all of us, for sure.
Yeah. And what is one principle that you live by?
That one was tough. I think that for me, I've learned that living a life of intention, so your intentions aren't good enough, right? Like we're all we hope we're well-intended. I know I see myself as someone who's well-intended, but I have learned through experience that intentions aren't good enough. So I have to invest my time and also a different level of thoughtfulness to things I do. So that's sort of a value that I try and ascribe to, or a way of living that I try and work towards.
Yeah. Really, really important. Yeah. I can see what you're saying about like bringing from intention to action and to really being in integrity with the intention that we have is, I think, part of it. Hey.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
definitely.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I'm going to leave you with the last word. Thank you so very much for coming on and sharing this. I know that it has been wonderful for me, and I look forward to bringing it out to all of our people. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to talk to you, always.